Hello, everyone. My name is Evelyn Thompson. My life, from the very beginning, has known its fair share of peaks and valleys. After my dear husband passed away, my partner in life, the man I had weathered so many storms with, I learned to walk a path of solitude. This house, a place that was once so warm, filled to the rafters with the sound of his laughter, now held only me and our memories. But I never felt truly alone, because I had a purpose, a reason for being that was far greater than myself. That purpose was to raise our only son, to see him grow into a good and honorable man. I poured my entire youth into that single mission, setting aside all of my own dreams and personal wishes to focus solely on his education and his care. Every time I saw him growing a little taller, a little stronger, every time I saw that bright smile light up his face, all the hardship and the heartache would simply melt away. I truly believed that as long as my son was happy, my life was more than complete. It was full. And then, that wonderful day finally arrived. The day my son found the woman he wanted to build a life with. When he told me he wanted to get married, my heart just swelled with a joy and happiness I could hardly contain. I had always hoped he would find someone to start his own family with, someone to share in all the sorrows and the triumphs, a partner to walk beside him for the rest of his days. I welcomed my future daughter-in-law, a young and beautiful woman who seemed so gentle, with a completely open heart. I imagined that this house would once again be filled with laughter, that the warmth of a new family would settle into its very walls. I pictured all of us gathered around the dinner table, the air buzzing with lively conversation. More than anything, I pictured the clear, bright laughter of grandchildren, a sound I had been longing to hear for so many years. And I made a silent vow to myself that day: I would be a good mother-in-law. I would love her like she was my own daughter and make sure she never felt anything but cherished. But life has a way of turning out differently than we plan, doesn't it? Just a few months after my daughter-in-law moved in, the curtain I thought was so transparent began to lift, slowly, revealing a darker side I had never, ever imagined. In the beginning, everything was perfect. She was polite, her words were sweet as honey, and she always showed me such consideration. I was overjoyed, and I thanked my lucky stars that my son had been blessed with such a kind wife and a dutiful daughter-in-law. But then, the smallest signs began to appear, things you could easily miss if you weren't paying attention. A flicker in her eyes, the slightest furrow of her brow when she thought no one was looking, a sudden, unexplained silence that would fall over a room. I tried my best to ignore it. I told myself I was just being overly sensitive, or maybe she was just tired and stressed from adjusting to a new life. Those signs, however, only grew more and more obvious, until I could no longer deny the harsh reality of my situation. I was performing. Every single day, in the very house I had built with my own two hands, I was playing a role on a stage. This home, my sanctuary, was now a theater, and I was being forced to play a part that was not me. I couldn't even take a deep breath freely anymore. I was afraid to even sigh, worried that the sound might displease her. I couldn't close a door in my own hallway with a natural motion, because I was terrified the noise would be seen as an offense. Even speaking to my own precious little grandchildren became a luxury I had to carefully ration. I had to weigh every word, every action, making sure I never crossed the invisible lines she had drawn around me. Every time I tried to approach the children, to speak to them or pull them into a hug, I could feel her cold, disapproving eyes on my back. Slowly, I began to retreat into myself, watching my grandchildren only from a distance as my heart ached with a pain that has no words. To her husband, my son, my daughter-in-law was the very picture of a gentle wife and a devoted daughter. Whenever Michael was home, her face was lit with a brilliant smile. Her tone of voice was so soft and kind that sometimes I wondered if this could possibly be the same person. Words like, "Mom, have you eaten yet?" or "Don't you worry about that. I'll take care of it," would fall from her lips so naturally, so sweetly. Because of this, my son trusted his wife completely, absolutely certain that he had found a compassionate and loving partner. And I could never bring myself to tell him the truth. I knew if I did, he wouldn't believe me. He would think I was just being a difficult old woman, a jealous mother who couldn't stand to see him happy with someone else. I was so afraid that it would create a crack in the bond between mother and son, a bond I had spent a lifetime nurturing and protecting. But the very moment Michael's back was turned, the instant she thought no one was watching, that gentle mask would vanish. In its place was a sour expression, a sharp, irritated glare. If I accidentally dropped a bowl? A small, simple mistake anyone could make. She would shoot me a look of such utter contempt. You would think I had committed a terrible crime. Another time, I was on the phone with a neighbor and my voice got a little loud, a habit I've had since I was young. I heard her let out a heavy sigh and mutter something under her breath, something cutting that I didn't have the courage to ask her to repeat. In those moments, a deep, hollow ache would settle in my chest. A feeling of sadness and utter helplessness would wash over me. I, who had once been the matriarch of this home, a strong and decisive woman, was now reduced to living by the look on my daughter-in-law's face, my days governed by a constant, crippling anxiety. Every single morning when I wake up, the first thing I think about isn't what I need to do that day, but what kind of mood my daughter-in-law will be in. I watch her every move, her every glance, and I carefully adjust my own behavior accordingly. If she seems cheerful, I can feel my shoulders relax just a little, and I might allow myself to speak a bit more than usual. But if she's frowning, her brow furrowed in annoyance, I retreat back into my shell. I move as quietly as possible. I make myself small, becoming a transparent shadow in my own home. This feeling of being watched, of being managed even in my own private space, has become a form of exquisite torture. I find my mind drifting back to the days when my husband was still alive, when it was just the two of us. This house was always filled with laughter then, with warmth and with peace. Now, that peace is gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating air that makes it hard to breathe. I feel like an unnecessary presence, a burden that everyone is simply tolerating. I tried to endure it. I truly tried to be patient. I did it because I didn't want my son to worry, and I couldn't bear the thought of disrupting our family over what I kept telling myself were trivial matters. She's just young, I would whisper to myself in the quiet of my room. She just doesn't know any better yet. I held on to the hope that time would soften her. That maturity would teach her the kindness she seemed to lack. I would search for any reason, any justification I could find for her coldness, clinging to the slimmest sliver of a chance that things would get better. But deep in my heart, I knew the truth. I was losing myself. The strong, cheerful woman I had once been was gone. In her place was a timid, withdrawn version of me, a woman who lived with a constant knot of fear in her stomach. And then, something happened that I never could have anticipated. An insult so profound, so unforgettable, that it carved a permanent scar into my soul. It happened on my own birthday, a day that should have been filled with joy, a day for celebration and the warmth of family. Instead, it became the day I was wounded more deeply than I had ever thought possible. I had no way of knowing that this day, my 75th birthday, would be the very beginning of a fire, a righteous anger that would finally begin to burn in the heart of this old mother. That day, which by all rights should have been a happy one, a day to feel loved and cherished by my family, instead became a painful memory, a wound that I know will never fully heal. I can recall every single moment of that day with a clarity that still chills me to the bone. It was the day I received an insult so bitter, so utterly unacceptable, that it changed everything. It had started a few days earlier when my son, Michael, came to me with a bright smile on his face. "Mom," he said, his voice full of pride and affection, "Renati is going to plan a party for your birthday this year." The words warmed my heart instantly. I knew that my daughter-in-law didn't show much interest in me, but the thought still made me impossibly happy. Even a small gathering, anything that showed I was being thought of, that I was loved, would have been more than enough. I didn't want for much. A simple, warm meal and a few kind words from my son and his wife. That was all I ever dreamed of. A secret hope began to bloom within me. Maybe she was finally changing. Maybe she was starting to see me, to feel something for me. And this party was her way of making up for the tension of the past few months. That small hope became a beacon of light, illuminating my days as I waited with quiet anticipation. Finally, my birthday arrived. I woke up early, made myself a simple breakfast, and then I waited. I pictured the scene in my mind. My daughter-in-law, Renati, would bring out a little cake, its candles lit, and our small family would gather around to sing, "Happy Birthday." I prepared myself to receive their good wishes with a genuine smile. But the hours ticked by with an agonizing slowness. Morning bled into noon, noon into afternoon, and still, there was no sign of any celebration. Renati moved about the house just as she always did, with no special word, no kind gesture, nothing to mark the day. A feeling of unease, tinged with a familiar disappointment, began to settle over me. Had Michael forgotten? Or had Renati simply ignored what he'd told her? When dinner time came, Michael returned home from work. I watched as Renati set the table with a few simple dishes, nothing out of the ordinary. Still, I held on to that last shred of hope. Perhaps the party was planned for after our meal. When we had finished eating, Michael looked over at his wife, his eyes full of expectation. Renati gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and walked into the kitchen. A moment later, she returned holding a small cake. It wasn't a grand cake from a bakery. It was a tiny, plain sponge cake, the kind you might grab hastily from a gas station or a convenience store shelf. There were no candles. There was no festive writing iced onto its surface. She placed the cake on the table without a word, without a hint of a smile. My eyes darted from the sad little cake to my son, and then to my daughter-in-law. Michael looked surprised too, but he tried to force a smile anyway. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, his voice full of the love I knew he felt for me. I tried to smile back, to meet his warmth with my own, but an unspeakable sorrow was welling up in my chest. With no candles to blow out, no celebratory words to fill the space, the silence that fell over the room was deafening. It felt less like my own birthday, and more like I was an unwelcome guest at a stranger's somber gathering. Then, Renati held out a present. It was a small package, wrapped in plain brown paper. I took it from her, a faint hope flickering within me. Maybe it was a warm scarf, I thought, or a new blouse. I slowly, carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a brand new mop. I couldn't speak. My hands began to tremble, and the package slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the floor. A mop? My birthday present was a mop? I couldn't believe my eyes. I looked up at Renati's face and saw an expression devoid of all emotion, except for a faint, cruel hint of a sneer playing at the corners of her mouth. Then she spoke, and her voice, though soft, was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice, piercing me straight through the heart. "So you can do a better job cleaning the house, Mom." Those weren't just words. It was a calculated insult, a deliberate and powerful blow aimed directly at me, at all the years I had dedicated to caring for this family and this home. It felt as if a heavy stone had been placed on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Every last bit of hope, every small expectation I had harbored, vanished like smoke. In that moment, I understood with painful clarity just how small, how powerless, and how utterly pathetic my existence had become in this house. Michael looked bewildered, his eyes shifting between me and his wife, but he said nothing. I'm sure a mop was the last thing he ever expected to see as a birthday gift for his mother. But she wasn't finished. As I sat there, stunned into silence, Renati leaned in closer, her face near my ear. Her voice lost its feigned softness, becoming a cold, sharp whisper, like the edge of a razor blade. "You're just a worthless old freeloader," she hissed, "shamelessly clinging to your son's house." Her words shot through me like a bolt of electricity, stealing my voice. My whole body began to shake, and I could feel hot tears threatening to spill from my eyes, but I held them back. I would not show my weakness to my son, and I absolutely would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I turned my head away, pretending I hadn't heard a thing, trying to act as if her venomous whisper had never reached me. But inside, a violent storm had begun to rage. I took a deep breath, trying to hold on to my composure. I simply couldn't believe that my own daughter-in-law could say something so cruel to her mother-in-law, especially on my birthday. Freeloader. Shamelessly clinging to your son's house. The words echoed in my mind over and over, searing themselves into my heart. I thought I had weathered so many storms in my life, overcome so many challenges, but the pain of being scorned and insulted by my own family was something entirely different. It was an agony I had never known before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my daughter-in-law's words ringing in my ears. I thought back on all the years I had quietly sacrificed for my son, all the days I had worked to support this family. I had always tried so hard to be a good mother, a loving wife, a thoughtful woman. And now, I was being treated like a parasite, a thing to be thrown away. Tears soaked my pillow, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were born of rage and a profound sense of helplessness. I had endured. I had been patient, but I couldn't take it anymore. In the darkness of that night, just when I felt like everything was about to fall apart, a fire ignited within me. It wasn't the fire of despair, but the flame of indignation, of a will to stand up for myself. I could not continue to live like a shadow in my own home. I could not allow my daughter-in-law to walk all over me, to insult me whenever she pleased. I had to do something. I had to show my son the truth about the woman he believed in so deeply. I needed to find justice for myself, for all the years I had given. The quiet, patient mother I had always been made a decision to change. I was going to fight back, and I was going to make it clear to my daughter-in-law that disrespecting an old mother was a grave mistake. After that fateful birthday night, something inside me shifted permanently. That fire of anger wasn't just a fleeting spark. It became a powerful motivation, driving me toward action. I could no longer live a life of patience, humiliation, and quiet suffering. I told myself that the time had come to reclaim my dignity, to get justice for myself, and to finally show my son the true face of the woman he trusted. The gentle, long-suffering mother I once was began to meticulously piece together a plan. I knew it would be difficult, but I also knew it was necessary to expose the hypocrite living under this roof. I began to think about how I could actually carry out this plan. I couldn't just go to my son and tell him about Renati's behavior. I knew he would never believe me. He loved his wife so much, trusted her so completely, that he would dismiss my words as the jealous complaints of a difficult mother-in-law. I needed proof. I needed hard, undeniable facts that he couldn't ignore. How could I get that proof? The question kept me awake night after night. Then one afternoon, I got a call from my younger sister, Susan. Susan is the only person in the world I trust completely, the one person I can tell anything to. I told her everything about Renati's treatment of me, and especially about that awful, painful birthday. Susan was filled with a mixture of anger and sympathy, and she urged me to stand up for myself. "You can't keep taking this, Evelyn," she said firmly. During our conversation, she happened to mention her son, my nephew, Jason. He was a bright young man who had just graduated from college. He'd landed a new job in the city and was looking for a temporary place to stay for a few months while he searched for an apartment he could afford. Hearing that, an idea sparked in my mind. A brilliant, perfect idea. This was the chance I had been searching for. I immediately made an offer to Susan. "Let Jason come stay with us," I said. "We have a spare bedroom downstairs." At first, Susan hesitated, saying she didn't want to impose on me. But I insisted, telling her that having Jason around would help with my loneliness and that I'd love the company. Finally, she agreed. The choice of Jason was deliberate. He is a good kid, young, cheerful, and tall, but most importantly, he was raised to be impeccably polite. He speaks to adults with respect and has a friendly, easygoing nature that allows him to get along with just about anyone. I knew that Jason's presence would be the perfect piece to move on my chessboard. With him in the house, a new element would be introduced. The entire dynamic would shift, and I hoped that it would finally force Renaty's true nature to the surface. A few days later, Jason moved into our house. I set him up in the guest room on the first floor, conveniently located near the living room and the kitchen. I did this intentionally, trying to create as many opportunities as possible for him and Renaty to interact. I would often ask him to come grocery shopping with me or to help out with the cooking. At first, Renaty seemed visibly annoyed by his presence. She was cold toward him, barely spoke, and did her best to avoid him whenever possible. In front of Jason, just as she did with Michael, she tried to play the part of the perfect wife and the dutiful daughter-in-law. But I was patient. I waited. I know that a person's true character can't stay hidden forever. I began creating various situations where Jason and Renaty would have to speak to each other when Michael wasn't home. For instance, I'd ask Jason to help in the kitchen while Renaty was cooking. Or I'd ask Renaty to find a book in the living room that Jason was looking for. Little by little, I started to notice small changes. At the beginning, Renaty would just scowl whenever I asked her to interact with him, her attitude as chilly as ever. But then, I noticed her appearance began to change. She stopped wearing the old, faded sweatpants and t-shirts she usually wore around the house. Instead, she started putting on nice blouses and clean jeans. She began wearing a little makeup, just a touch of mascara and lipstick. Then one day, I even caught the faint scent of a light, floral perfume as she walked past. I smiled to myself. My plan was slowly but surely beginning to work. And then, the moment I had been anticipating the most finally arrived. My daughter-in-law, Renaty, began to show a genuine smile whenever my nephew, Jason, was around. It wasn't the stiff, artificial smile she forced when she spoke to me, nor was it the practiced, dutiful one she reserved for my son. This was a truly bright, charming, and natural smile, the kind that lit up her entire face. The way she spoke to Jason was different too. She was relaxed and at ease, and sometimes her gestures seemed overly familiar, bordering on intimate. I would often catch her stealing glances at him, her eyes holding a look that was almost flirtatious. It was a world away from the cold indifference she showed me, or the carefully constructed affection she performed for her husband. I was extremely careful not to let my suspicions show. I maintained my gentle facade, continuing to show both Renaty and Jason my undivided attention and care. I made it a point to praise Renaty in front of Jason, and then praise Jason in front of Renaty. I wanted to create the most comfortable environment possible, a space where she would feel safe enough to let her guard down completely. I knew that exposing a person's true nature requires time and trust, and I was fully prepared to wait. I had all the patience in the world. The moment my son, Michael, walked through the door after work, Renaty would instantly snap back into her role. The performance of the gentle wife and the devoted daughter-in-law would begin anew. But now, I could see the difference. I could see the light that shone in her eyes only when she looked at Jason, and I could see the subtle ways she tried to capture his attention. Even when her husband was in the same room, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was on the right path. My plan was beginning to work, slowly but surely revealing the dark corners of my daughter-in-law's heart. I knew the road ahead was still long, and that there would be many more challenges to face, but I was no longer the weak, timid woman I had once been. The fire of anger that burned in my chest had become my strength, forging my will into iron. I would not stop, not until my son finally saw the truth, not until I had reclaimed the justice I deserved. I would never forget the humiliation of that birthday, and I would make absolutely certain that nothing like it ever happened again. I would teach the daughter-in-law who had so casually scorned me that underestimating an old woman was a grave mistake, and I would make my son realize that he had placed his trust in the wrong person. Time passed, and like a patient hunter, I continued to watch my prey in silence. I felt no need to rush, no sense of urgency. I understood that a perfect trap requires meticulous care and unwavering persistence to be effective. My daughter-in-law, blinded by her own arrogance and greed, was walking step by step into the snare she had laid for herself. The changes in her clothing, the way she smiled, the look in her eyes whenever Jason was near, It was all so obvious now. And every sign she gave me only fueled my resolve, confirming that I was doing the right thing. I also began to notice her new habits. Long after the rest of the family had gone to sleep, I would lie awake in the darkness, listening. I would hear a soft noise from Renati's room, followed by the gentle click of the kitchen door opening. I knew she was going downstairs to the kitchen, and I knew she wasn't alone. A few moments later, I would hear another set of familiar footsteps. Jason's footsteps. I didn't even need to see them. I knew the two of them were down there together, in the quiet of the kitchen, shrouded in the stillness of the night. During those late hours, I would find excuses to leave my room. I'd pretend I needed to use the bathroom or that I was thirsty and wanted a glass of water. On several occasions, I walked through the living room, positioning myself so I had a clear view of the kitchen. A dim light would spill from the doorway, illuminating the scene inside. One night, I saw them. Renati and Jason were sitting nestled together on the small love seat. They weren't just sitting close, they were whispering to each other, and I could hear their soft laughter echoing faintly in the silent house. The way they looked at each other was not normal. It wasn't the way family members look at one another. It was flirtatious, secretive, the kind of glance shared between two people engaged in something illicit. My heart tightened in my chest, but it wasn't from pain. It was from a cold, validating rage. I was getting closer to the truth. I continued to observe, careful not to miss a single detail. Renati, who had once been so cold and distant, now acted with an unnatural familiarity toward Jason, constantly creating excuses to speak with him. She would bring him snacks while he was studying, or offer him a cool drink, while he was helping with chores around the house. To an outsider, it would have looked like nothing more than a kind sister-in-law caring for her husband's cousin. But I, who had lived under the same roof with her for so long, knew this was a performance, a clever charade designed to hide something else entirely. One day, my daughter-in-law left her cell phone on the kitchen table. I pretended not to notice, but inside my mind was racing with curiosity. I knew this could be my chance to find the proof I needed. I deliberately knocked a spoon off the table, letting it clatter to the floor. As I bent down to pick it up, I feigned a moment of dizziness and steadied myself against the table. In that split second, I stole a glance at her phone's screen. I could see a new message, notification. I couldn't read the content, but I could see the sender, and it was a name I didn't recognize. It wasn't my son. A few days later, another opportunity presented itself. While Renati was in the shower, her phone was once again sitting on the table. My heart began to pound. I quickly thought of a plan. Pretending I needed to call my sister, Susan, I picked up Renati's phone with a casual air, as if it were a simple mistake. When I unlocked the screen, I saw a message she had been in the middle of typing, ready to be sent. My blood ran cold as I read the words. The text on the screen said it all, clear as day. If I hadn't gotten married so early, I couldn't breathe. If I hadn't gotten married so early. The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just a simple lament. It was undeniable proof of her regret. A clear expression of her desire to escape her current life, her marriage to my son. This was the concrete evidence I had been searching for. I quickly put the phone back down, my hands trembling slightly, and composed myself, acting as if nothing had happened. But inside, a tempest was raging. There was no longer any room for doubt. The daughter-in-law I had tried to welcome, the woman my son trusted with all his heart, was betraying him. She was deceiving our entire family. A bitter smile formed on my lips. It was a smile filled with pain, but also with a strange sense of relief. My instincts had been right all along. Her true nature was finally laid bare. The facade of the meek, obedient woman she had played for so long had completely crumbled away. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't the chill of fear. It was the cold steel of determination. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that the final blow was approaching. I understood, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I had gathered more than enough evidence, more than enough reason to finally tear down the wall of lies my daughter-in-law had so carefully constructed. The guilt and hesitation that had once held me back were gone. burned away by the fire of her betrayal. There was no more room for doubt. What I was about to do was not just right, it was necessary. It was for the sake of my son Michael, and for the soul of this family, which had been poisoned by deceit for far too long. I would not, allow my son to continue living in a world built on falsehoods. No matter how much it would hurt him, no matter the pain it would cause, I had to show him the truth. My mind began to race, methodically considering the best way to expose Renati's deception in public. I had no desire to create a chaotic scene, to devolve into shouting matches or senseless drama. I wanted the reveal to be quiet, yet carry a weight so immense that my son would have no choice but to accept the crushing reality of it. This was going to be a battle, I knew that, a merciless confrontation with no easy outcome. But I was ready. After everything I had endured, I had nothing left to lose. I was fighting for the truth, for justice, and finally, for myself. When everything became so painfully clear, when the last piece of the puzzle slid perfectly into place, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. It was time to act. I didn't want a spectacle. I had no intention of screaming or becoming violent. The years had taught me many things, and one of them was this: the quiet power of undeniable proof is the strongest weapon of all. I had weathered enough storms in my life to understand that shouting accomplishes nothing. All I needed was my phone and a recording. I thought long and hard about how to obtain that one piece of irrefutable evidence. Text messages could be deleted. Words spoken could be denied, twisted, or explained away as a misunderstanding. But a recording was different. A voice recording captured the tone, the intention, the raw and unfiltered truth in a way that nothing else could. It was the most accurate, the most vivid, the most undeniable proof I could possibly get. I decided to plant a small recording device in the kitchen. It was the one place in the house where Renati and Jason often spoke late at night, when they thought everyone else was asleep and no one was listening. I went online and ordered a tiny, discreet audio recorder, small enough to be hidden easily, but powerful enough to capture their words with perfect clarity. A few days later, the perfect opportunity presented itself. Renati and Jason had gone out for the afternoon, leaving me alone in the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved quickly. I took the small device and placed it in an inconspicuous corner of the kitchen, tucked behind a canister of flour on the counter. It was the perfect spot, close enough to the small table where they usually sat to capture every whisper. I checked it carefully, making sure it was on and functioning correctly. A wave of nervous energy washed over me, a mixture of high-strung tension and a grim sense of purpose. This was a dangerous step, a point of no return. But I saw no other choice. This was something I had to do for my son, and for my own peace of mind. The days that followed were an exercise in excruciating patience. Every night, my entire body would tense up when I heard Renati and Jason make their way to the kitchen. Lying in my bed, I would strain my ears, listening to the low murmur of their voices. Was the recorder working? Was it picking up what I needed to hear? I had to force myself to maintain a calm and normal demeanor on the outside, acting as if nothing was wrong, even as my insides were burning with anticipation and anxiety. I kept repeating a mantra to myself: don't rush. Be patient. The truth will come out. And then, the day came. After several days had passed, I waited for another moment when the house was empty and retrieved the recorder. I took it back to my room, closed the door, and with trembling hands, I began to listen. At first, there was only the low hum of the refrigerator and some faint static. But then, their voices emerged, startlingly clear and familiar. It was Renati's voice, and Jason's. My heart began to beat at a pace I had never felt before, a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. I leaned closer, listening intently to every single word. The first part of the conversation was filled with a vague, playful sort of flirting. I heard my daughter-in-law using sweet, suggestive words, her tone light and teasing as she charmed Jason. I heard her soft, throaty giggle, followed by Jason's slightly embarrassed but pleased replies. Then, the conversation shifted, becoming more direct, more overt in its invitation. Renee began to speak about the unhappiness in her marriage. She complained about my son Michael, claiming he didn't understand her, that he didn't care about her needs. I listened, my stomach churning, to the sound of her whining voice, and to Jason's comforting, sympathetic replies. And then came the moment I had been dreading, the one that would haunt me forever. I heard my daughter-in-law say a single sentence, a phrase that would remain etched into my memory for the rest of my life. "If you wanted me to," she whispered, her voice full of promise, "we could get a divorce." Those words were like a dagger, sharp and cold, plunging straight into my heart. If you wanted me to, she was willing to throw away her marriage, to discard my son, for a man she had only just met. Her lies, her audacity, her sheer contempt for our family was beyond anything I could have imagined. A wave of pure, unadulterated disgust washed over me, so strong it almost made me sick. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just sat there, frozen, listening to every word, every laugh, every breath she and Jason shared. I recorded it all, the proof within my hands. There were no more doubts, no more questions. I didn't cause a scene right away. I knew that for this devastating blow to have its maximum effect, I had to choose the right time and the right place. I decided that I would confront them with the truth at the dinner table. When my son and even my young grandchildren were all present, I wanted Michael to face the undeniable reality of his wife's betrayal in the one setting that was supposed to represent family, love, and unity. On the chosen day, I prepared dinner just as I always did. I kept my expression serene, my movements calm, showing absolutely no hint of the storm raging inside me. My daughter-in-law was her usual self in front of my son, chattering away cheerfully, playing the part of the perfect, loving wife. Jason, too, was on his best behavior, his manners impeccable, his attitude polite and deferential. The meal began in what seemed like a warm and pleasant atmosphere, but to me, it was the terrifying, suffocating quiet before a hurricane. As the meal drew to a close, I took a long, deep breath. I could feel my pulse thrumming in my ears like a war drum. I knew the decisive moment had come. My hand trembled just slightly as I reached for my phone. I looked at Renati, my eyes locking with hers, and then I shifted my gaze to my son. They both looked surprised, confused by my sudden, deliberate action. Without saying a single word, I pressed play. The sounds filled the sudden, dead silence of the room. Renati's voice, Jason's voice, the flirtatious words, the seductive invitations, and then that one, crystal clear phrase echoing around the dinner table. "If you wanted me to, we could get a divorce." The air instantly turned to ice. My son, Michael, froze, his chopsticks hovering in midair. The color drained from his face, his expression shifting in a matter of seconds from surprise to shock, and then to a dawning, gut-wrenching horror. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, pleading pain and utter confusion. My daughter-in-law was sitting directly across from me, her face now a ghastly shade of pale. Every bit of color had vanished, leaving her skin a stark, waxy white. Her eyes were wide, staring at my phone as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. When the recording finished, I kept my eyes fixed on my son's. In a calm, steady voice, I said, "This year, for my birthday, I decided to give myself the truth." Michael was stunned, completely speechless. He just stared at me for a long moment, then his gaze shifted to his wife, the woman he loved. The truth was too harsh, too brutal for him to process. He was utterly broken. My daughter-in-law was silent for a long moment, and then she began to wail. It wasn't just crying, it was a raw, primal scream of someone who had been caught, cornered with no way out. Tears streamed down her face, which was twisted into a mask of pure terror. She tried to deny the accusations, to make excuses, but her own voice, captured on the recording, was there to refute her every word. "No, Mom, it's not like that. It's not what you think," she cried out, her voice thick with a desperation that was almost pitiful. But it was far, far too late for that. The proof was right there on the table between us, clear and undeniable. I just looked at her, my heart feeling like a cold, hard stone in my chest. I felt no pity, no compassion. I had given her so many chances. I had been patient, I had endured so much in silence, but she had chosen to lie, to deceive, and to insult me in my own home. Now, it was time for her to face the consequences of her own actions. I knew this would be a terrible shock for my son, a wound that would cut him to the very core. But I truly believed that the truth, no matter how painful it might be, was always better than living a life built on a foundation of lies. There was nothing left to save. It was all over. When a lie is finally exposed, everything built upon it comes crashing down, and in the wreckage, all that's left is a profound sadness and a strange, hollow emptiness. Listening to my daughter-in-law's desperate sobs, seeing the agony etched onto my son's face, I didn't feel any sense of joy or satisfaction. There was no victory here. Instead, I was filled with a deep sorrow and a heavy sense of regret for the family we could have been, for the happiness that was now shattered forever, all because of her deceit. After a long, heavy silence, my son suddenly let out a cry. It was a sound I had never heard from him before, a sound filled with a lifetime of pain, anger, and crushing disappointment. He stared straight into his wife's face, his eyes boring into hers. All this time, you were lying to me? To my mother?" he shouted, his voice cracking with the sheer force of his betrayal. My son's words sliced through the quiet air like a knife. Renati was still sobbing, still trying to stammer out excuses and explanations, but her words were meaningless now. They were just empty sounds in a room that had been drained of all trust. My son didn't believe her anymore. You could see it in his eyes, the unwavering light of absolute trust that had always shone there when he looked at her was gone. In its place was a cold, hard stare of betrayal and disgust. I just sat there, watching it all unfold in silence. It hurt my heart to see my son in so much pain. I knew this was a wound that would go deep, one that might never truly heal. But I also knew that this was necessary. He needed to see this truth for himself. As painful as it was, he had to face it. After that night, Renati went back to her parents' house. The home suddenly became unnervingly quiet. There was no more of her forced, cheerful laughter, no sound of her light footsteps moving through the halls. All that remained was a terrible, echoing silence. A few days later, the divorce papers arrived in the mail. I wasn't surprised. I knew it was inevitable. The relationship between my son and his wife had been damaged beyond any hope of repair. Quietly, I began the task of putting the house back in order. I started by taking down the large wedding photograph of Michael and Renati. That hung in the living room. It was a picture I had once looked at with so much hope in my heart. I carefully tidied the mantelpiece, polishing the silver frames that held pictures of our family from happier times. I wiped down every surface, every cherished object, and with each touch, I was flooded with memories. Memories of bygone days, of beautiful moments, and of the profound sadness that had taken their place. I felt no sense of satisfaction. Not at all. In fact, an overwhelming feeling of emptiness washed over me. I had won. I had exposed Renati's true nature and reclaimed my own sense of justice. But the price of that victory had been far too high. My family was broken. My son was in terrible pain, and I was right back where I started, alone. As I looked out the window, the first rays of morning sun began to stream into the room. This house, which had once been a place so full of laughter and life, now felt cold and empty. I thought back to the happy years I had spent here with my late husband. I asked myself, over and over, if I had done the right thing. Could I have avoided all this pain? Was there another way, a better way, to have solved this? But then, I remembered Renati's cold words. I remembered the mop she had given me for my birthday. I remembered the contempt in her eyes every time she looked at me. And I remembered all the days I had spent living in fear and anxiety, walking on eggshells in my own home, forced to play a part just to survive. I realized then that no matter how painful the outcome, I had done what I had to do. I could not allow myself to be trampled on, not anymore. At the very least, I had reclaimed the dignity that had been stripped from me for so long. It was the dignity of a mother who had dedicated her life to her family, the dignity of a woman who deserved respect. Our family may never be whole in the way it once was, but I was no longer weak. I was no longer willing to just endure. I had become a strong, resilient woman, and I believed with all my heart that with time, my son's wounds would heal. We would find a new path forward, and we would walk it together. I would always be by his side, supporting him, ready to face any hardship with him. No matter how rough the storms of life became, I would remain standing. In the aftermath of it all, my life settled into a new, quieter rhythm. There were no more forced smiles, no more searching looks to decipher. I no longer spent my nights sleepless with worry. The house, once a stage for so much tension, became my peaceful sanctuary once again. Here, I no longer had to play a role. I could finally just be myself. One morning, I sat on the back porch as the gentle morning sun warmed my face. With a hand that trembled just a little, I poured myself a steaming cup of tea. The faint, earthy aroma drifted up to me, a smell that seemed to hold both the bitterness of life and the sweet comfort of peace. I lifted my head and watched the golden light filter through the leaves of the old oak tree in the yard, and I took a deep, slow breath. A rare sense of calm spread through my entire body. In that quiet moment, so many memories came flooding back. The days of fear and constant vigilance, Renati's icy words, the humiliation of the mop, the tense night I played the recording. All of that pain no longer had the power to break me. It was a part of me now, a part of the long, difficult journey I had to take to find myself again. A small smile touched my lips. It wasn't the smile of endurance I had worn for so long. It was a smile of liberation, a smile of strength. I know my story might make many people think, and so I want to share what I have learned, the lessons I earned in the wake of the storm. I am not a cold-hearted person, and I am not a vindictive woman. I am simply a mother. An old mother who has poured a lifetime of love and sacrifice into her son. But I was treated like a stranger in my own house, the very place where I should have been able to live out my final years in peace, surrounded by the love of my children and grandchildren. People often say, when you get older, you should just put up with things for the sake of peace in the family. For a long time, I believed those words. I tried my best to hold my tongue, to endure it all in silence. The last thing I ever wanted was to cause trouble in my son's home. I truly thought that my silence, my patience, would somehow bring peace. But then, I finally realized something. If the choice is between living like a shadow, suffering quietly in a world built on lies, or becoming a storm to sweep away all the rot, then I would choose to be the storm. I could not allow myself to be trampled on for one more day. And I could not allow the deceit to continue poisoning the air in this house. This wasn't a victory. I don't feel like a winner in this battle. There are no winners and losers when it comes to family. When a family breaks apart, everyone loses. All I did was rescue myself from a phony play I was never meant to be a part of. In the first place, I am no longer a passive observer, no longer a person who will simply tolerate falsehoods just to keep things calm. On the surface, I stood up, I faced the truth head-on, and in doing so, I finally set myself free. My son is still suffering. The wounds in his heart will take a very long time to heal. I know that he needs me now more than ever before. I will continue to be right here by his side, to be his support, and we will get through this difficult time together. Together, we will build a new life for ourselves, a more honest and, I hope, a more peaceful one. In this life, no one can ever truly predict what will happen next. Sometimes, we have to face harsh realities and a kind of pain that has no words. But what truly matters is how you face it, how you find the strength within yourself to stand back up. I chose the path of standing up, even though it hurt more than I can possibly say. And I believe with all my heart that it was the right choice to make. And that is where my story ends for today. To all of you who have stayed to the very end, who have listened to the story of an old mother, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I truly hope that sharing this with you has given you something to think about, and perhaps a lesson you can carry with you on your own journey. I'll see you all again in the next video.